Ben, the question you're answering today is, what if you could perfectly train reindeer?
Yeah, so I'm gonna get to that. But first, and this does wind up being relevant, don't worry. I wanted to look into where the actual link between reindeer and Santa comes from. Because it's kind of random, right? Like, it doesn't really, like, there's, nothing that seems like it would, cause that necessarily.
Reindeer, like, they hang out near the North Pole, right?
Yeah, but, like, it still seems kind of, I don't know.
I'm interested to know what it is, but it seems a little buck wild than the person who connected rabbit, the Easter bunny, and eggs.
Well, okay, fair.
Someone has a very poor understanding of
anatomy.
Bunnies.
Yeah. Or biology. I don't know. Anyway, so it's the first time it's mentioned. There's this poem, this illustrated poem from 1821 called "Old Santa Claus with Much Delight," which it mentions, like the sleigh and the reindeer and chimneys and stockings and bringing toys and all that. It does mention the one sort of really weird thing in it is that naughty children will be brought a rod to be spanked with.
Oh.
Which is a little, yeah, so the line is, but where I found the children naughty and manners crude and tempers haughty, thankless to parents, liars, swearers, boxers or cheats or base tale-bearers, I left a long black birchen rod, such as the dread command of God directs a parent's hand to use when virtue's path his sons refuse, which is pretty intense for something that you read to children on Christmas. But you know what? Whatever. This is how the 1800s rolled, I guess.
Yeah, it's also a pretty dark take for someone who decided to rhyme naughty with haughty.
Right, yeah. Also, by the way, that is how the poem ends. That's the last line. So they really, sting it there at the end.
Judgment Day.
Yeah. So that was the first mention. The most well-known mention was a couple years later, which was Clement C. Moore's A Visit from St. Nicholas, or as it's better known, 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, which is where we get our traditional reindeer names. Although, the one interesting thing, Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid are all the same, but originally it was actually Dunder and Bliksem, which are just Dutch for thunder and lightning instead of Donner and Blitzen, which are German. So, but fun fact, originally it was Dutch. I don't know.
Why did they change it?
Man, I honestly looked into that. I could not. At some point, someone, I think, just got confused and thought it was like a typo or something. I don't know. Yeah. And assumed it was supposed to be German or not Dutch. I don't know. But that's like the first times that they're like directly linked as, in the way that we think of them as being linked with Santa. But neither of them really, I guess, A Visit from St. Nicholas kind of mentions them flying, but it doesn't really like explain it really ever even. Explain it really ever either. It kind of just happens. So why does, it's just the first time that reindeer talk about flying in this poem. And that's definitely not true. It's actually much, much earlier than that. So there are these deer stones. There are these standing stones in Siberia and Mongolia. They're like granite. They're like 3 to 15 feet tall. And they first came up around like 1000 BC by like the nomads in the Bronze Age who were like living there. And these standing stones with these like carved representations of warriors and weapons and animals, primarily deer. And deer are featured on them all the time. That's why they call them deer stones. And they're depicted as flying through the air, not just like running. And there was this guy, Piers Vitebsky, who spent 17 years living with the Evany reindeer herders in northeast Siberia and wrote a book called The Reindeer People. He said the reindeer is depicted with its neck outstretched and its legs flying out fore and aft, as if not merely galloping but leaping through the air. And then he also said that basically, like, a lot of times the antlers would be extended and containing, like, the sun or something like that, or some sun-related image. So it was definitely, there's this link between reindeers and the sky and flight. And it's not just like, this is how they were showing animals. There are other animals shown sometimes, and those are always shown just more naturally. Just, like, the example they gave was kind of weird because it was Siberia, but it was like a tiger confronting a horse, which isn't really what we'd think about, but Siberia, so it makes sense. I don't know. So there is definitely this like long-rooted link between flight and the sky and reindeer. And anthropologists think that this is probably because of magic mushrooms.
What?
Specifically, Amanita muscaria, which is this toxic and psychoactive mushroom. It's like a red mushroom with white like spots on it. It's kind of like the, when you think of like you see like a poison mushroom in like a cartoon or something, it's kind of that mushroom,
Yeah, like who would eat that colored mushroom?
Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So they're actually not that toxic. The lethal dose for an adult human is like 15 caps, so it takes a lot to actually be like lethal. And the North American Mycological Association, so mushroom people, they say that there's no reliably documented cases of death from the toxins of these mushrooms in the past 100 years. So it hasn't happened in a long time. With like modern medicine, it's pretty hard to die from them. It has happened in the past, like back in the 19th century and earlier, just because either children ate them accidentally or people ate them trying to get high because they are psychoactive. Which sort of brings us to looping back to Santa a little bit. Was Santa a drug dealer? Because so there's this anthropologist, John Rush, who's an instructor at Sierra College in Rockland, California, who actually thinks that the Santa myth is an adaptation of the solstice habits of Siberian and Arctic shamans. So these shamans, they would use this mushroom. They would consume it in order to go on vision quests. They use it the same way that, in the American Southwest, they use like peyote and stuff, it's that same sort of idea. But for the winter solstice, they'd collect these mushrooms, dry them, and give them to people as gifts for the solstice. And a lot of times, it would be very snowy at these times, so any doors at ground level would be blocked. So a lot of times people's homes would have a roof entrance as well, which he says is kind of where we got the whole coming down the chimney thing. And these mushrooms might also be the reasons that we bring in Christmas trees. So these mushrooms have a symbiotic relationship with conifer trees like pines. And he says that's kind of like reason we do like the presents under the tree is that down there is where the mushrooms would be growing. And then this part is kind of disputed. The shamans...
Only this part is kind of disputed. Everything else is fact.
Yeah, everything else complete fact. So the shamans may have dressed in red and white, like Santa does, because that was the color of the mushrooms. They may not have actually dressed like that, but I know they've been depicted like that before because of the link between them and the mushrooms. So it's at least very possible that Santa was basically adapted from these shamans who brought these, psychoactive mushrooms to people as gifts, which is pretty great.
It's probably less far-fetched than it sounds, but I can't help but imagine, and the clothes, and someone puts, another, pin on the corkboard with red string.
and the yarns all going back and forth.
Yeah, while he's, pinning, a Santa hat to the edge, and he's, circles it with a big red marker, and he's like, look!
Yeah. So to loop this back into reindeer, the link there is that reindeer love these mushrooms. So reindeer apparently... will burrow down into the snow to find these mushrooms and eat them. And apparently it doesn't seem to be toxic to them. It could just be that because they're bigger than us and it just would take even more for it to be toxic, or maybe it's not toxic at all, actually. There's something about, different in their biology where it's not toxic to them, which is possible. But they do definitely get the psychoactive effects as far as people can tell. Reindeer herders have seen that after they eat them, they'll behave drunkenly. They'll run around aimlessly and make weird noises. Their heads will start twitching sometimes.
Is that why they seek them out? Because
I think, yeah, they want to get high. I'm pretty sure that reindeers are drug addicts. Is kind of what I'm getting at here. I will also say that I learned this is not the first time that humans have discovered a drug because of animals and the way they acted around it. Apparently, according to Ethiopian legend, there was a goat herder named Kaldi who saw his goats become so energetic after eating these certain berries from a tree that they wouldn't sleep at night. And he told the abbot of his local monastery he brew a drink with it, and that was coffee, and it was caffeine. And that's how we discovered coffee and caffeine, was because goats got all amped up on it. So, fun fact. So, regardless, back to reindeer. Apparently, sometimes the Siberian shamans, and apparently sometimes just reindeer herders as well, because they wanted to get fucked up, would drink the reindeer urine to get high.
Oh, no.
Because apparently, something about the way the reindeer process the mushroom, it would strip away the toxicity, but leave the psychoactive effects.
Who was the first one to do this and found it out?
I don't know. I mean, it's someone in ye olden times, clearly, but I mean, they didn't have TV back then. They had to stay entertained other ways, so drinking reindeer urine was apparently how they did it. I don't know.
I mean, it's got to be a prank, right? Like someone's like, "Oh, you want some lemonade?" and then you give them the reindeer piss, and it's very funny between
yeah, and then half an hour later they're tripping balls and
they're like, "Dudes, dudes, I'm so high right now. What was in that lemonade?"
And the other guys are all convinced that this is like a a counter prank to try to get them to drink the urine too.
In order to get the effects, you probably have to drink like a full cup of it.
It's a pretty good amount of urine, I'm sure. Yeah. I don't know. But anyway, once again, anthropologists think that this link where the reindeer would eat the mushrooms and then, piss out the mushrooms and shamans would drink it and get high. They think that's why there's this link between flight and reindeer. Because, you have these animals that would eat this and act weirdly, and then they would drink the urine and also act weirdly and feel high, and that's why they're shown this way as flying and everything, and that's where we get this link between reindeer and flying. And all this is a really roundabout way to say that if I could perfectly train reindeer, what I'm doing is making drugs.
That was a clip from Absurd Hypotheticals, the podcast where we answer dumb hypothetical questions. For the full episode, click on the link in the description.